Good morning. It's so good to see each and every one of you. If we haven't met, my name is Joey. I serve as one of the pastors here. And it's a privilege for me to be with you for this gathering. Every time we get together, our belief is that God meets with us and He desires to stir up something new in our lives. And so I hope you came expectant as we were singing, as we were praying, that He's already been speaking and stirring up something in your heart. This week and for the next 3 weeks, we are starting a new teaching series which we are calling The Simple Life. The Simple Life. And the idea is to explore 3 practices that lead us to steward our lives towards a more wholehearted way. So we started the year in January by talking about a more wholehearted way. And now as we go into the rest of the year, the invitation is, how do we live this out? And we want to look at 3 practices that can help us to move in that direction. And the song we just sang, the band just led us in, describes those 3 practices. And that our anchor teaching text is going to be from the verse that song is derived from. If you could turn with me to the book of Micah, or Micah, depends on group of schools that you went to. Micah chapter 6 and verse 8. Micah chapter 6 and verse 8. It says, "He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, to do justice, to love mercy." He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Micah was one of the prophets who came after the nation of Israel had split after the reign of Solomon. And he makes these 3 invitations to the people of Israel. And we believe that they are just as relevant today for our modern lives as they were to the people that he was speaking to. The invitations he makes are do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. And this week, we'll take the first, do justice, and we'll put our focus on it. And the following week, we'll talk about mercy and then walking humbly with God. So to start us off, what images come to your mind when you think about justice? What comes to your mind? What do you see as the first things when you think about justice? For many of us, when we think of justice, what comes to our mind is the professional context of the word. You think about a lawyer, or being in a courtroom, or a judge, or a police officer, the people who are entrusted with the judicial system. If that's not what comes to mind, maybe for you it's the action of justice, the protest, activism, looking and caring after those who are impoverished, taking our lives and taking time to go and visit and to serve with them. But if you were to go back in history and meet an ancient Israelite and ask them about justice, their response would shock you. If you were to go back to one of the people that Micah was talking to, and you were to ask them, what is justice? The way that they answered that would point you to not something that is compartmentalized within the lives of particular people as a profession, or something that we get to do in order to, just alleviate a situation for an event or a project or something that we attend to once in a while or occasionally. For the Israelites, justice brought up a very different mindset. To them, it was not something that you did once in a while. It was something that affected every aspect of their lives, because justice was rooted in the character of God and in the creation of the world. And so we go back to Genesis chapter 1 to see God creating the world, and He makes the heavens and the earth, and He says that they are good. And out of that goodness, God continues in the creation. In chapter 1, verse 27 and 28, we see him creating humankind. And humankind is entrusted to be stewards over creation and to live in this pattern of loving, caring, protecting all of creation and living in right relationship with God, with each other, with creation, and within themselves. And so when an Israelite thought about justice, what they saw was everything as it ought to be. Everything set in the way and in the order that it was meant to be. It was about our relationship with God and that being right. It was about our relationship with each other and that being right. It was about the way that we stewarded all of creation and that being right as well. And it was about our sense of being whole. And so, looking at justice from that perspective leads us to see that justice was actually what God made the world for. That God made the world to be in complete harmony and in complete order with integrity and connection with each other. And the Hebrews had a word for that sense of justice and wholeness. They called it shalom. The English translation for that word is peace, which in our world means absence of conflict. But the word shalom actually captures a much bigger sense of what things ought to be. That things are in complete wholeness and unity and perspective with one another. That the things that God made would be flourishing and generative in the way that they acted towards each other. That there was beauty and order and dynamic relationship in those things. And so the question becomes for us, is this the kind of world that we live in? Is it a world that is filled with that sense of shalom and goodness and wholeness? If you were to step outside this room, if you were to look into our own lives, we would discover very quickly that the world that God created as just is not very just. It's not as it ought to be. Our relationship with God is not as it ought to be. Our relationships with one another, with the way that we steward the world, that our world is broken and fractured and fragmented. And beginning in Genesis chapter 3 and leading up to the very world that we live in, when human beings chose to take and to define and to redefine good and evil according to our own convenience, the world became a world of injustice, a place where brokenness touches every single thing that is there. And so God's shalom becomes violated and wounded. We see it and we feel it in our lives every single day as we go around. You feel it when someone insults you or does something that violates your sense of right. You feel it when you're riding in the matatu and the conductor doesn't give you your change back, and when you are late, you're a few shillings short. You feel it when someone cuts you off in traffic, or when you are working in a workplace where people are not paid fair wages. You feel it and you see it in the institutions where it begins to flow out and to become systemic. You see it in the conflict between nations. And what started off as a sense of injustice in one thing touches everything. And all of us are victims of being violated, our sense of right being violated. But all of us are also perpetrators of that violence and that oppression and that injustice. And so the world we live in has in it unimaginable abuse and neglect, violence and bloodshed, hatred and a sense of racism and classism, wars that make no sense, and generations of cycles of injustice that have been going on. And the question becomes, what has God got to do with this? What is God's sense as we step into a world that is filled with evil and suffering and brokenness? And how does He want us to live in that broken world? When we pick up the story after Genesis in the book of Exodus, we find God embarking on a shalom restoration mission. And He takes this one nation, one group of people, the Israelites, and He rescues them from the oppression of the Egyptians. And He says to them, bringing them to Mount Sinai, and He says to them, you will become the embodiment of what God's restoration of justice is going to look like. I'm going to take you as a people group, and then I'm going to begin to do in you what I want to do for the rest of the world. I'm going to begin to pour out blessing for you in the way that I want to pour out blessing for all of the world. I want to begin to restore for you justice in the way that I want the whole world to be restored. And then we come to that section of Exodus that all of us have heard and been taught the 10 Commandments in one way or the other. And when God gives this instruction to the Israelites, He wasn't telling them, this is the standard that I want you to meet. Instead, He was taking a sense of justice begins with righteousness. And everywhere you look in the scriptures, you'll find those two words going together with one another. God says, I want you to live out righteousness and justice. And once you know the one true God, I want you to live a different lifestyle that would reflect to the other nations around you what it means for you to be a world with justice. Side note, many years ago when I was a single person, after a really bad breakup, I decided that the best thing for me to do and the best remedy for a broken heart was for me to read the Bible cover to cover. How bad was the breakup, you ask? It was that bad. I needed Jesus, the prophets, and all the visions of John. And so I decided that I was going to read the Bible cover to cover, and I was not going to date anyone until I finished that process. I had some very not good friends around me who would mock me every time we meet by asking me, how far have you gone? And the purpose for this is very important because I got to Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and it was excruciating. I wanted to drop the project. But two things that I learned in that period that have completely reframed the way I see justice and God's perspective on it is when you read through Leviticus, Numbers, and for most of us, we just skip the whole book. But if you were to pick out the sections where God's instruction is passed on to the people of Israel, and to look at the laws that He gave them about justice, you would notice two things. The first is that God's justice, unlike the world's justice, bends towards those who are on the margins, those who are unheard and seen, and those who are on the sidelines of the world. While the world's justice can be molded and bended towards the wealthy or the ones who are able and the ones who are powerful, God's justice instead looks after the oppressed, the undermined, the poor, the widow, the orphan, and the foreigner. And you will see that quartet repeated everywhere that God talks about justice. And the second thing that you would see is that when God gave Israelites the laws about justice, 90% of that law was about restorative justice, and the other 10% was about just retribution. What does that mean? It just means that instead of God just punishing people for every single wrong thing that they did, the laws of God were designed as given to the people of Israel to bring people back into community, into a space where they were whole. And the laws for retribution, where you see stoning and all of those things that people ask you, so are we supposed to do that to people? The places that you see that are for just retribution. A couple of quick examples. You look at Leviticus chapter 19, and God says, if you have a field that you are not to harvest all the way to the edges of the field, the middle of the field belonged to you, but the edges of the field belonged to the poor, the orphans, the widows, and those who are foreigners. You go a bit into Numbers chapter 35, and you find that in the nation of Israel, there were refuge cities where you could run for asylum in case you committed manslaughter or accidental murder. That you would not just be stoned, you could actually flee there and your case could be heard. You go to Leviticus chapter 25 and you see God creating a space for what was called the year of Jubilee, the year of the Lord's favor. And in that space, anyone whose inheritance had been bought from them, it would be returned to them. Anyone who was living out a life of slavery would be freed so that they could begin their lives again from a place of dignity and respect. And according to God's laws of justice, there could be no personal worship, there could be no communal worship without a public outward display of justice. And it's crazy when you read it and you begin to see that. Because then the rest of the story of the Old Testament is God basically saying, I want you to walk with these two hand in hand. I want you to walk with a personal sense of righteousness, that you're walking with me, you're surrendered to me. But then that surrender has to translate towards serving those on the margins of your world. Not as something you do occasionally, but your everyday life needs to reflect that. And so by the time we get to Micah, the nation of Israel is failing terribly at that project. They're coming to God in surrender, but God says, you have become a nation where leaders take bribes, and you have become a place where people are corrupted. You no longer look after the orphans and the widows. It has become lip service to me, but with no public display of what ought to be right in your daily living. And so God, when he speaks to the nation of Israel, he's speaking to a world very much like ours. A place where you see people abused, neglected, and that category, that quartet of the poor, the orphan, the widow, and the foreigner in our world has expanded so much into the unemployed, the single mothers, the refugee, the person who's on the edges, who can't make a world for themselves. And when Jesus steps into that world, he steps in as one of those who are to suffer injustice. Jesus came in under a Roman Empire that was overseeing the nation of Israel. And he came in and suffered the same injustice that the people. He came in as a person on the margins, born in a rural village where no one could see. But he steps in and he takes that justice, shalom, restoration of wholeness project to a whole other level. And he says in Luke chapter 4, verse 18 and 19, he comes into the world and in his inaugural speech to his village and the people that he had come to, he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind. He has sent me to set the oppressed free and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." That all of a sudden, what had been reserved for a people group was now open for every single person. That now ordinary people could take part in doing justice because they were connected to the one who was the most just. And Jesus, when he's speaking in Matthew in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, "You know what? I haven't come to abolish the law. The law that was given to you was for restoration and retribution. Instead, I have come to fulfill it and to invite you to a different way of looking at justice. Instead of you going and serving because you're feeling guilty that, you know what, now I haven't done something nice this year, so I need to go to a children's home. Instead of you doing justice because that child is knocking on the car door and saying, "Boss, saidia." Now I want you to be part of a justice system and a grace that will be about renewal and transformation. That justice will no longer just be about restoring. He says, "You have heard it said, do not murder. But I say to you." And he elevates the bar on justice so high. You have heard it said, "An eye for an eye, but I say to you, if someone slaps you on one cheek, turn the other. If someone asks for your coat, or for your shirt, give him your coat." You have heard it said, "Love your friends, hate the haters, cancel them, move them, block them. But I say unto you, love your enemies." And when the people heard that, it was completely revolutionary, because no other system, no other world ideology presented justice as a sense of renewal and transformation through love. And so when God says, this is the way that you are to live, you are to do justice, that your everyday life is to be like this, Jesus begins to model it for us with his life, his death, and his resurrection. Jesus was the person with the busiest mission, with the most important mission, and the most important things to get to. But yet he always made time to be interrupted to do justice. Jesus was the person who had all that he could be, all the power that he could use to oppress and to make people come under his authority. Instead, he uses it to empower and to give people dignity and worth. And so he says to us, this is what I want you to do with your life. I want you to take the very elements of your life, your time, your resource. I want you to take your emotion. I want you to take your mind, the life of your thoughts, and every sphere that you could think of, and to begin to do in that, and to begin to create margin in that for those who are most afflicted to set things as they ought to be in the world, with God, with each other, with creation, and within yourself. What does your schedule look like? If you're like me, the moment you start getting to February, the year begins to look very daunting. Your calendar that was open in January is now filling up with meetings, appointments. You're beginning to feel that sense of tension within you. You're getting angry at your child a bit more often. People are getting you upset. You're beginning to move and to feel the tension of life pressing in on all that God has given us. And yet Jesus shows us that the way to live out a life of justice cannot happen unless we have margin in our lives. It's so interesting to me that in the parable of the feeding of the 5,000, when Jesus has finished teaching the crowds and it's gotten to evening, the disciples come to him and they say to him, "Master, send them away, for we are in a deserted place, there's no food, and they need to go get some food, shelter, something to sort out their evening, and so that they can go into the rest of the day." And the very first statement that Jesus makes is, "You give them something to eat." Before we get to the 5 loaves, before we get to the miracle, the first statement out of Jesus' words is for his disciples to do justice, attend to them, meet them, serve them, make things, make shelter, make food. Be the one who does justice. And so the question becomes, what does this look like for us on a day-to-day basis? How do we live out this radical, selfless renewal that Jesus introduces to us? How do we move into the world with a justice and a grace, not a justice under the law that is motivated by guilt, but one that is motivated by generosity and compassion and a desire to lift and to empower the people on the margins, the unheard, the unseen? And I want to suggest to us 3 things that would move us in that direction. The first thing is we have to resist indifference. We have to make our lives of courageous resistance. Resistance in the sense that we need to move from spaces that detach us from those who are on the margins and to begin to get closer to that which breaks God's heart, that which looks like it is not as it ought to be. And we begin, and the way we do that, like I said, is by creating margin in our schedule. But more than that, it means that we need to start doing the deep work of not being frustrated by how bad things are. When you look at the starting point, and when you look at the political situation, when you look at the economic situation, when you look at the place that your family is in, that one black sheep in your home, when you look at the way the situation looks like, we need to start opening up our lives so that we are not frustrated by the starting point. We don't look at the obstacles and see everything that we need to jump over. But most importantly, we don't become disinterested because of our comfort, the things that we have surrounded ourselves with. A few years ago, I read the book Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. And it's an amazing story of this young lawyer who's given of himself to move into the justice system and look after those who are incarcerated and on death row. And he tells this story about how one day he went to see his grandmother when he was about 9 or 10. And when he went to see her, she told him, "Brian, you can't understand the most important things from a distance. You have to get close." And so for us, every single day, how are you making room in your time, in your energy, in your emotional world, in your thoughts, to get close to the spaces and the people suffering injustice? Number 2, everywhere we see injustice, more than just resisting and becoming and choosing to get close, we need to begin to posture ourselves in a place of lament. What happens when you get connected to injustice is all of a sudden the cries are no longer too far away. The grief, the pain, the suffering, the evil all gets very close to where you are. And when you look at the Psalms, a third of the Psalms is the psalmist crying out and lamenting on behalf of the injustice that is going on in their own life and communally and corporately. And so as a people, we begin to find language to bring those injustices before God. We begin to find language for abuse, to say, "God, this is not as it should be." We begin to find language for those who are unheard, for those who are suffering, for those who are feeling pain because of evil. And we begin to say to God, "God, we need you to hear us. We want you to come close. Help us to make a difference in these spaces." And lament enables us to process the issues of injustice with a lens where we don't lose hope or we don't give up. When the magnitude looks too big, we have a place to channel our processing. When we are thinking, "But what I have to offer is so little," we have a place to process our offering towards injustice. We have a place to take the oppressors that look untouchable and to make ourselves process our own heart so that we don't become a people who hurt others because we've been hurt by injustice. We become healers. We become a people who are healed through lament, and we can go out and spread healing. And so, as we begin to resist indifference, to choose lament, what then happens is we become a people of action. We become a people who repair. When we are fueled by the compassion of God in our own lives, when we are fueled by the one who is able to heal and to restore and to redeem everything, then we can take our everyday lives and we can make them lives that repair and rebuild and renew the places of injustice. Tim Keller says that justice in general looks like us living lives that lead to human flourishing. But in specific, it looks like us going to the place where the weakest of society, the fabric of shalom has been torn and becoming a people of repair. And Jesus models this to us so well. In Matthew chapter 9 and verse 35 all the way to 38, if you've been in this church any amount of time, you've probably heard that verse. It's where Jesus went about the towns and the villages. And it says that when he looked at the people, when he saw them, he felt compassion in his heart because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to get about his work through healing and restoring the lives of those people. So, in closing, once upon a time, there was a small town on the edge of a river at a bend. And the townspeople in that town used to go and have picnics by the edge of the river. And one day, as they were having their picnic, they noticed 3 bodies floating in the water. And so they quickly put together a rescue party. Some guys jumped on a boat, and they went and they pulled out the people who were in the water. And of the 3 people, they found out that 2 were adults, badly wounded and injured, and so they rushed them to hospital. But one of them was a little child, and one of the townspeople said, "You know what? I'm going to take care of them. They can have a home in my place." And every day after that day, bodies would keep floating on the river just on the edge of that village. And so people began asking themselves, what do we do? And some people responded with generosity. They offered their money to build more hospitals, to make boats, and to join the rescue team. So other people decided, you know what, we feel a sense of compassion. They would take in the people into their homes, nurse them back to health, help them to live out, to recover and to go back to their lives. But a few people decided that what they were doing at the edge of that village was not enough. And so they chose to put on backpacks, pack a few things, and get their water bottles. And they said, we are going upstream to see the source of where the bodies are coming from, and we want to fix the problem there. Justice, to do justice, is to wake up every morning and to go upstream. To go upstream to find the source. To go upstream to say, Lord, I want to identify with the root cause and with the people suffering, and to set things right. I hope this has been as much a challenge and a conviction as it was for me as I was getting ready. Because this is not what my life looks like on an everyday basis, just to be honest. But I felt so challenged by the life of Jesus to posture my life in a manner that reflects his justice in the world. And that means for us who have been victims, it's an opportunity for us to say, God, heal us. Heal us. For the spaces we've been oppressing, neglecting, it's God, forgive us. God, help us. And for the places we felt like our input was too little, or you know what, we've made excuses because it's too big, it's too much. It's a place to say, Lord, I want to try once again. And that's what the Lord's table is all about. It's about a God who invites us over and over and over again to come to him and to say, God, I'm open. Do justice in my life and lead me to do justice in the lives of others.